The snow fell gently on Christmas Eve, coating the quiet streets of downtown with a blanket of white that sparkled under the warm glow of street lamps. Alexander Hayes walked slowly along the sidewalk, his expensive black coat protecting him from the cold as he carried a single bag containing his lonely dinner for one. At 34, Alexander had built an empire in technology and finance. His penthouse apartment overlooked the city. His bank account had more zeros than most people could imagine, and his name appeared regularly in business magazines. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, he felt the weight of his solitude more than ever. The holiday lights that adorned every storefront seemed to mock his isolation. Families hurried past him, bundled together in warm embraces, heading home to celebrations he had never truly experienced. Alexander had grown up in foster care, moving from home to home, never staying long enough to understand what family meant or how holidays were supposed to feel. As he turned the corner onto Maple Street, something unusual caught his attention. A small figure sat alone on the steps of the old community center, barely visible in the falling snow. As Alexander drew closer, he realized it was a little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, wearing a beautiful pink dress with delicate lace trim and a gray sweater that looked handmade with love. Her blonde hair was braided carefully with small ribbon bows, and despite the cold, she sat perfectly still, as if waiting for something or someone. Alexander slowed his pace, concerned about why a child would be alone outside on Christmas Eve. "Excuse me," Alexander said gently, approaching the steps. "Are you all right?" The little girl looked up at him with the most striking blue eyes he had ever seen. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face, though he was certain they had never met. She studied him for a moment with the serious expression children sometimes wear when making important decisions. "My name is Isabella," she said, softly, her voice clear despite the cold. "I have been waiting for someone." Alexander knelt down so he could speak to her at eye level. "Isabella, that is a beautiful name. I am Alexander. Who are you waiting for? Where are your parents?" Isabella's small face grew sad, and she looked down at her hands folded carefully in her lap. "My mommy went to heaven 3 months ago. I live with Mrs. Peterson now, but she had to go to the hospital tonight because her heart was hurting." Alexander felt his chest tighten with sympathy. This little girl was facing the kind of loneliness he understood all too well, but at an age when no child should have to bear such weight. "Isabella, you should not be sitting out here in the cold. Is there someone I can call for you?" Isabella shook her head slowly. "Mrs. Peterson said the social worker would come tomorrow to take me to a new place. But tonight is Christmas Eve, and I do not want to spend it alone in an empty house." She looked up at Alexander with those remarkable blue eyes, and what she said next took his breath away. "Can you be my daddy for one night? Just until Christmas is over?" Alexander felt the world stop around him. This brave little girl, facing abandonment and uncertainty, was asking him to be the family she desperately needed. The request was so innocent, so heartbreakingly honest, that Alexander found himself unable to speak for several moments. "Isabella," he said finally, his voice gentler than it had ever been, "that is a very special request. But I do not know anything about being a daddy." Isabella smiled for the first time since he had found her, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "I do not know much about having a daddy either. Maybe we could learn together." Something in her smile triggered a memory that Alexander had buried deep in his mind. Suddenly, he was 7 years old again, sitting in a different social worker's office, listening to a kind woman explain that his mother would not be coming back. He remembered the fear, the confusion, and most of all the desperate wish that someone, anyone, would choose him. "All right, Isabella," Alexander said, surprising himself with the decision. "I would be honored to be your daddy for Christmas Eve, but first, we need to get you somewhere warm. Isabella's face lit up with joy as she stood and slipped her small hand into his larger one. "Thank you, Mr. Alexander. I knew you were the right person when I saw you walking down the street." Alexander led Isabella to his car, helping her into the passenger seat and adjusting the heater to keep her warm. As they drove through the snowy streets, Isabella chattered happily about Christmas traditions she remembered with her mother, and Alexander found himself genuinely smiling for the first time in months. "Where are we going?" Isabella asked as they pulled into the parking garage of Alexander's building. "To my home," Alexander replied. "I live in an apartment upstairs. It is not much for Christmas, but it is warm and safe." When they reached Alexander's penthouse, Isabella's eyes grew wide with wonder. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city lights, and despite the lack of Christmas decorations, the space felt magical with the snow falling outside. "It is like a castle in the clouds," Isabella whispered. Alexander realized that his expensive apartment, which had always felt empty and cold, suddenly felt different with Isabella's presence. Her wonder and joy seemed to fill the space with warmth he had never noticed before. "Isabella, are you hungry? I was planning to have dinner, and I would be happy to share." Isabella nodded enthusiastically. Mommy always said that Christmas Eve dinner should be special. Alexander looked at the simple meal he had purchased for himself and realized it would not be nearly special enough for this remarkable little girl. "Would you like to help me make something better? Something more fitting for Christmas Eve?" For the next 2 hours, Alexander and Isabella worked together in his kitchen, preparing a feast from ingredients they found in his well-stocked refrigerator. Isabella proved to be an excellent assistant, carefully measuring ingredients and sharing stories about cooking with her mother. As they cooked, Alexander found himself opening up about his own childhood, sharing memories he had never spoken aloud. Isabella listened with the kind of attention that only children can give, accepting his stories without judgment and offering comfort with simple observations about how people find each other when they need to most. "Mr. Alexander," Isabella said, as they sat down to eat their Christmas Eve dinner, "do you think my mommy can see us right now?" Alexander considered the question carefully. "I think that people who love us never really leave us completely. They live on in our memories and in the love we share with others." Isabella smiled and reached across the table to pat his hand. "Then, I think she would be happy that we found each other tonight." After dinner, they sat by the large windows, watching the snow continue to fall over the city. Isabella curled up against Alexander's side, and he found himself stroking her hair gently, marveling at how natural it felt to comfort this little girl. "Mr. Alexander," Isabella said sleepily, "I do not have any presents to give you for Christmas." "Isabella, you have already given me the best present I have ever received." "What is that?" Alexander looked down at her trusting face and realized the truth of his words. "You have shown me what it feels like to be needed, to be chosen, to matter to someone else." Isabella smiled and snuggled closer. "And you have shown me that even when you feel all alone, someone might be walking down your street just when you need them most." The next morning, Alexander woke to find Isabella still sleeping peacefully beside him on the couch. Sometime during the night, he had covered her with a soft blanket, and she looked like an angel in the morning light. When Isabella woke, she looked around with momentary confusion before remembering where she was. Then her face broke into that radiant smile that had already changed Alexander's life. "Merry Christmas, Daddy Alexander," she said softly. "Merry Christmas, Isabella," he replied, and meant it more than any words he had ever spoken. Later that morning, the social worker arrived as scheduled. Alexander had called ahead to explain the situation and to make a request that surprised even himself. He wanted to begin the process of becoming Isabella's legal guardian. "I know this seems sudden," Alexander told the social worker, "but sometimes you know something is right from the very first moment. Isabella needs a family." And I need her just as much as she needs me. 6 months later, the adoption was finalized. Alexander had transformed his penthouse into a real home, complete with Isabella's artwork on the refrigerator, toys scattered in the living room, and the kind of warmth that only comes from shared love and laughter. On their first Christmas together as an official family, Isabella and Alexander sat by the same windows where they had spent that first magical night. "Daddy," Isabella said, now completely comfortable with the title, "do you remember when I asked you to be my daddy for one night?" "I will never forget it," Alexander replied, hugging her close. Isabella looked up at him with those same remarkable blue eyes that had captured his heart on a snowy Christmas Eve. "I think maybe I knew that one night would turn into forever." Alexander smiled, understanding now that the little girl who had been waiting on those steps had not been waiting for just anyone. She had been waiting for him, just as he had been searching for her without even knowing it. Sometimes, he reflected, the greatest gifts come disguised as chance encounters on cold winter nights. Sometimes, a lonely child and a lonely adult can save each other simply by choosing to open their hearts to the possibility of love. And sometimes, Christmas miracles happen not with magic, but with the simple decision to answer when someone asks, "Can you be my family?"